It was exactly 10:47 p.m. when I heard the first knock, and before I even had time to wonder who would be showing up that late, the person outside quietly said my name. Ryan. Just one word, spoken in a calm, almost casual voice, like they already knew who lived there, and weren't asking to make sure. The whole thing caught me completely off guard because I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't ordered food, none of my friends had mentioned stopping by, and both of my parents were out of town until the following afternoon. I was just standing in the kitchen, eating a bowl of cereal after a long day, enjoying the silence of having the house to myself. 3 slow knocks echoed through the house, followed by my name, and something about how confident the voice sounded immediately made me stop what I was doing. I walked over to the front door and looked through the peephole, expecting to see someone standing there. Instead, there was nobody, at least nobody directly in front of the door. I figured maybe whoever it was had stepped off to the side or was already walking away, so I unlocked the door and cracked it open just enough to lean outside. The porch was completely empty. The street was just as quiet. A couple of parked cars lined the curb. One porch light glowed across the road, and there wasn't another person anywhere in sight. I actually laughed to myself because it felt ridiculous. For a second, I wondered if I'd somehow imagined hearing my own name. Then, just as I was about to close the door, I noticed the gate at the end of our driveway slowly swinging shut. It wasn't blowing wildly in the wind. It looked exactly like someone had just passed through it a second earlier. Even then, it didn't really scare me. It was just strange enough to make me pause before locking the door again and going back inside. At the time, I was 22 and still living with my parents while I saved money to eventually get my own place. They'd driven out earlier that day to stay with my aunt while she recovered from surgery, and I'd stayed home because I had work early the next morning. Our neighborhood wasn't the kind of place where random people wandered around at night. It was mostly older couples, families with kids, and people who had lived there forever. You almost never heard about thefts or suspicious people knocking on doors after dark. Because of that, I convinced myself it had probably just been some neighborhood kids messing around. I texted my mom anyway, mostly because I thought she'd find it funny. I wrote, "Someone knocked and said my name. Probably neighborhood kids messing around." She replied with one of those laughing emojis and reminded me to make sure every door was locked. Just to humor her, I walked through the entire house checking the front door, the back sliding door, and the entrance through the garage. Every lock was secure. Everything looked normal. Once I'd finished checking, I honestly believed that would be the end of it. Around 11:30, I was upstairs playing Xbox with my headset on when my dog suddenly started barking downstairs. That immediately got my attention because he wasn't one of those dogs that barked every time somebody walked by the house or whenever a squirrel crossed the yard. Most of the time, he barely reacted to anything outside. This bark sounded completely different. It was fast, sharp, and repetitive, almost like he was trying to tell me something was wrong. I muted my game and listened carefully. The barking was coming from the back of the house. I took off my headset, walked downstairs, and found him standing stiff in front of the sliding glass door that overlooked our backyard. The curtains were still open, and beyond the glass, everything was almost pitch black except for the small motion light mounted above the patio. He wasn't pacing or growling. He just stood perfectly still, ears pointed forward, staring into the darkness without blinking. I crouched beside him and quietly asked, "What are you looking at?" He never even looked at me. Right then the motion light suddenly flicked on. I expected to see a raccoon digging through the yard, or maybe a stray cat running across the fence. Instead, the entire yard was empty. There wasn't a single thing moving. After several seconds, the light shut itself off again, and almost immediately my dog relaxed, turned around, and casually walked back toward the living room as though nothing had happened. I convinced myself that maybe a rabbit or another small animal had briefly triggered the sensor before running off. That happened from time to time. Still, I walked over and closed the curtains before heading back upstairs. A little after midnight, my friend Tyler called me on Discord, and we talked while I played another game for about 20 minutes. At one point, I casually mentioned the weird knocking from earlier, expecting him to laugh, which he did. "Dude, Dashesh, bye," he said. "Someone's probably just trying to prank you." I shrugged even though he couldn't see me. "Yeah, maybe." He asked if I'd checked outside, and I told him I had. "Anyone there?" he asked. "No." There was a brief silence before he asked, "You sure somebody even said your name?" I answered without hesitation, "I know what I heard." He suggested maybe the TV had been on, but mine wasn't even turned on at the time. After that, I didn't really know what to say. Eventually, we ended the call, and I figured I'd get some sleep since I had work in the morning. I shut off the downstairs lights and had just started walking upstairs when something hit the side of the house with a loud thump. It wasn't the sharp sound of glass breaking or the metallic clang of something hitting the gutters. It sounded softer, like someone had thrown a heavy object against the siding. I stopped halfway up the stairs and listened. The entire house became silent again. There wasn't another noise. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app. We only had 2 working cameras at the time. One faced the driveway and the other covered the front porch. Both feeds showed absolutely nothing. No alerts, no movement, no person walking around. Unfortunately, we didn't have any cameras covering the backyard. For a brief moment, I actually considered grabbing a flashlight and going outside to see what had caused the noise. Looking back now, I'm incredibly glad I didn't. Instead, I went upstairs, locked my bedroom door, grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside my bed, and tried to settle in for the night. Sleep wasn't happening. Every little noise inside the house suddenly sounded 10 times louder than usual. I could hear the refrigerator humming downstairs, the air conditioning kicking on every few minutes, and tree branches scraping softly across the roof whenever the wind picked up. Around 1:15 in the morning, I finally started drifting off when my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a text from an unknown local number. The message simply read, "Your dog won't stop barking." I stared at the screen for nearly a full minute because my dog wasn't barking. In fact, the house was completely silent. I'd listened carefully just to make sure. Nothing. Whoever had sent the message either had the wrong number or knew something they shouldn't. A second message arrived before I could decide what to do. "Can you make him be quiet?" My heart started beating a little faster. I checked the area code. It was local. Trying to convince myself it was some kind of mistake, I replied with, "Wrong number." Almost instantly, another message appeared. "No, it isn't." The moment I read that, my stomach dropped. I blocked the number without responding again. About 30 seconds after blocking it, I heard 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. My entire body locked up. At first I thought someone was knocking directly on my bedroom door. That made absolutely no sense because I knew I was alone in the house. I hadn't heard any doors open, no windows break, and the alarm hadn't gone off. I grabbed the baseball bat beside my bed and stood there staring at the door, waiting for another sound. Nothing happened. After almost a minute, I nervously called out, "Hello?" There was no answer. Then it suddenly hit me. The sound hadn't actually come from the bedroom door. It had come from the outside wall beside it, the wall where my bedroom window faced the backyard. Someone had been knocking from outside. My room was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no deck, no lower roof someone could simply stand on. With my heart pounding, I slowly pulled back one corner of the curtain and looked outside. There was nothing except complete darkness stretching across the backyard. I immediately let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the window. That was when I called Tyler again. He answered, sounding half asleep. "Dude," he mumbled. I could barely keep my voice steady. "I think someone's outside." He instantly sounded more awake. I quickly explained the text messages and how I'd just heard knocking near my bedroom window. Before I could even finish, he interrupted me. "Did you call the cops?" I admitted I wasn't sure if I was overreacting. He didn't hesitate for even a second. "No, call them. Right now." Hearing someone else take it seriously was enough to convince me. I dialed 911 and explained everything that had happened, from the person saying my name at the front door to the strange texts and the knocking outside my bedroom. The dispatcher asked if I'd actually seen anyone, and I admitted I hadn't. She said officers were already being sent to drive through the neighborhood. While I waited, I kept every upstairs light turned off because I didn't want whoever might still be outside knowing exactly where I was in the house. About 15 minutes later, I saw flashing headlights filtering through the blinds as two police officers pulled into the driveway. They walked around the property with powerful flashlights before knocking on the front door. I let them inside and explained everything again. While they searched the backyard, they didn't find anyone hiding behind the fence, in the bushes, or anywhere else on the property. One of the officers eventually asked whether anyone knew I was home alone. I shrugged and mentioned that maybe a few friends knew. Then he asked if I'd posted anything on social media that evening. That's when I remembered the Instagram photo I'd uploaded earlier. It was just a picture of a pizza with the caption, "Parents gone, eating like garbage." It hadn't seemed like a big deal at the time. The officer asked whether my account was public, and I admitted that it was. He suggested making it private immediately and avoiding posting things that let strangers know when I was by myself. Just as the officers were getting ready to leave, one of them called me over to the backyard. He was holding one of our folding patio chairs. At first, I didn't understand why. Then he pointed toward my bedroom window above us. Someone had moved the chair from the patio all the way across the yard and positioned it directly underneath my second-floor window. Whoever had been outside had apparently stood on it, probably trying to reach high enough to knock against the wall or look inside. The realization hit me harder than anything else that night. I hadn't heard someone dragging the chair. I hadn't heard footsteps in the yard. They'd moved around the property almost silently, while I was inside, convinced I was imagining things. The officers searched again, but whoever had been there was already gone. They believed the person had probably run the moment police cars entered the neighborhood. I barely slept for the rest of the night. The following morning, my parents came home much earlier than expected after I told them what had happened. My dad decided to inspect the backyard in daylight, and it didn't take him long to find more evidence. Near the back fence, where the soil was still soft from rain the previous day, there were fresh footprints pressed deep into one of the flower beds. Not far from them were several cigarette butts scattered in the grass. Nobody in my family smoked. It looked like someone had been sitting behind our fence for quite a while, watching the house before deciding to come closer. That alone was unsettling enough, but what happened 2 days later was even worse. While checking some old equipment in the garage, my dad remembered we still had an older security camera mounted on the side of the house. We'd stopped using it months earlier because it constantly lost connection and no longer sent notifications to our phones, so we'd completely forgotten it existed. Amazingly, it had still recorded footage onto its memory card. We loaded the video and found a clip time-stamped at 12:15 11:58 a.m. A man wearing a dark hoodie and a baseball cap slowly walked along the side of our house with both hands tucked into his pockets. He wasn't rushing or sneaking. He looked completely relaxed, almost like he belonged there. When he reached the area beneath my bedroom window, he stopped. For nearly an entire minute, he stood perfectly still, staring upward without moving. Then, completely out of nowhere, he smiled. It wasn't some exaggerated, creepy grin. It was worse because it looked natural, almost familiar, like he'd just spotted someone he recognized. The strange thing was my curtains had been closed the entire time. There was no way he could have seen me. Yet the smile somehow felt personal, like he knew I was standing only a few feet away on the other side of the wall. After another moment, he calmly walked toward the backyard, disappearing behind the house. The camera never captured him leaving the property. The police kept a copy of the footage and investigated, but they never identified the man. Nothing else ever happened after that night. The text messages stopped. Nobody knocked on the doors or windows again. I made every single one of my social media accounts private that same day and completely stopped posting anything that hinted where I was or whether I was home alone. Looking back, the part that still sticks with me isn't that somebody came onto our property. Trespassing happens. People cut through yards, steal things, or look for easy targets all the time. What I still can't shake is that whoever that man was knew my name before I ever opened the front door, somehow knew I was alone that night, and at some point, without me ever noticing, figured out exactly which bedroom was mine. Even after all these years, that's the detail that keeps replaying in my head whenever I think about what happened.